How's it going out there? This is Fishheads IV, and sorry it took so long. I've literally filmed this sequence over 15 times. I've done this many different ways and it just wasn't working right, having a lot of technical issues. So we're just going to do this one last time. If this doesn't work, I'm just going to give up. Today we're going to talk about the different tanks and stands that you can get for your fish. So hopefully you planned out a spot in your house where you want to put the tank. You have everything ready to go, time to go buy some equipment. Now the first thing you want to consider is you want to try and buy the biggest tank you can get that's allowed in your budget. Now I'm not saying you have to go out and buy, a 200-gallon tank, but if your budget allows for something more than like a 10-gallon, that's great. If it allows for, let's say, just a 10-gallon or a 5-gallon, whatever, again, that's fine. You just have to appropriate the fish and livestock you're going to put in there accordingly. Now, there are two main types of tanks that you can get. You can either get a glass tank or an acrylic tank. Now, I know you can also get a plywood tank or one made out of, like, concrete. Those aren't your most common tanks, but they are out there. So let's talk about the glass tank first. Glass tanks are nice. They come in generally more common sizes. You have your 10s, 20s, 29s, 40s, 55s, 75 and up. Whereas acrylic usually comes in pretty much more unique, different styles, I guess, and so that allows you to have more of like an awkward water gallons, volume, right? So glass tanks. Glass tanks are nice. They're pretty common. They're pretty cheap usually. You can either get them new and have them all sparkly clean, or you can get them really cheap online. Used. I sell all my tanks, not all my tanks, but I move tanks pretty quickly just because, they're not too expensive to pick up. Just keep in mind that if you do buy a used tank, you're going to have to have some scrubbing. You have to have a pretty good constitution of stomach because some of these tanks are just god-awful. But anyways, glass is nice. Glass is usually going to be a little bit heavier. It's going to be, and most often than not, it's going to be rectangular. But you can get square tanks, you can get octagon tanks. My corner tank's actually glass too, where they bent the front end. Now, glass is nice because you can clean it and not worry too much about scratching it. It's not going to scratch too easy. Granted, if it does scratch, they're really kind of set in there unless you have some form of like glass restoration kit. It's really hard to get a deep scratch out of glass. But usually you don't even notice it too much. Now, glass is going to be heavier because the water pressure that's in there has to really have a good seal with each other. Well, the water pressure in here is going to be pushing on the seals of the tank, so the thicker the glass, with the trim kind of bracing it together, that's what's going to kind of hold it together, especially when you get into bigger tanks like hundreds, etc. Now, one of the downsides I want to say about glass is that it does rely on a silicone seal. So, if for any reason this decides to go, or let's say the person that made the tank, had an impurity where the silicone didn't adhere correctly, then you're going to have a leak. Now, when you go to fix a glass tank, it's not usually too hard to kind of rip off the silicone and like refinish it. I mean, it can get tricky, but it's not too bad. If you get a crack in one, most tanks, tanks can either be plate glass or tempered glass. If it's plate glass, it'll crack and just splinter. But if it's tempered, then it'll look like a million little pieces. So if you ever try to like cut your tank or something and you find that it just snaps into a million little pieces, then it's tempered. There are ways to find that out, but that's not going to be necessary for this video. So glass is nice, it's sturdy, but although it doesn't scratch easily, it's going to be heavier. It's going to be a little bit cheaper just because you can find them a little bit more commonly. Around used, etc. So it's not too bad. I don't mind glass, right? Now we move on to acrylic. Now this is my Sea Clear 50, I want to say, because this is a 40 and this is definitely bigger. But as you can see, it's all one seam. What's nice about acrylic is that it doesn't rely on a silicone seam between the edges. Now what they do is they use a solvent, right, that melts the two pieces of acrylic and binds them together on a molecular level. And that's essentially a weld. A weld is when you have two like materials and then you break them down to their molecules, to like their base metals, and then, well, not metals, but to their base materials, and you join them together so when they solidify, then they become one solid piece. You know, the best way to think of it is two candles. You know, you get two candles, you melt them, you stick them together, it's one candle. Same with acrylic. So it's going to have a little bit more of a stronger hold on all the seams. It's not going to be too prone to leaking there. And what's also nice is you can form acrylic. You can get acrylic tanks in all sorts of different sizes, you know, cylinders, bubbles, wave tanks. They're really cool, but at the same time, the more unique a tank is, generally the more kind of unique equipment you're going to need to run it. As you can see here, this one's got the rounded corners. It's kind of a mess right now. I actually have to clean it, but one of the downsides to acrylic is that it scratches pretty easily. Now, granted, if you have the right stuff to clean it up, you know, if it's a really bad scratch, you can usually buff it out with some really fine grit sandpaper. But for the most part, I think you can get chemicals and stuff that will kind of bring back its clarity. Acrylic is a lot more clear than glass. Glass has a bit of distortion to it because it has to be it can get pretty thick, right? Whereas acrylic, it doesn't need to be that thick, and the clarity between what you look into it and, you know, how everything kind of shows out is going to be better. So it's going to be lighter weight. It's going to be usually available in more funky designs, you know, the rounded corners. You can kind of cut and form if you want to. If you know what you're doing with acrylic, you can really kind of get some really unique tanks. So acrylic has that benefit, lightweight. It can get a little bit more pricey depending on, you know, who you go through, but like manufacturer's pricing, acrylic is going to usually be a little bit more expensive than glass, just because, you know, acrylic takes a little bit of finesse, I guess. So it has that benefit. Now, another thing you have to keep in mind when it comes to getting a tank is that water volume isn't necessarily universal. If this was a 40-gallon tank that's a little bit longer, if I were to have this in like one of those octagon tanks that some people have that go straight up, those tanks, even though they hold the same amount of water as a long tank, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can stock them the same in terms of livestock. When you have a really tall tank, you have a smaller footprint at the top. That's where the gases are exchanged between the fish and the oxygen coming into the tank. So when you have a longer surface area, you have more of an exchange of gases for your fish to breathe and be a little bit more healthy. Now, the other thing is that when you have a longer tank, if you think of a fish, the way it's built, you know, it's kind of built streamlined to go back and forth and side to side. Fish aren't generally meant to go straight up and down. I mean, they do it, but it's not, you know, their preferred mode of transportation, right? Think of it this way. Like us, you know, we got two legs, and we got arms and stuff we can climb if we want to, what have you. Would you rather be in a long hallway where you can run back and forth and have all that free space? Or would you rather be in a short closet having to climb up and down? Granted, you can do both, but for us, we're more built for hallways. You know, we want to have all that space to go back and forth and what have you. So the more space you can give your fish, the more, you know, depth to the tank, the better. If you were to look at like a 40-gallon breeder tank, they're going to be a little bit shorter just in terms of height, but they're going to be wider and they're going to be longer. So in terms of like how they look, I mean, they may look smaller, but in fact they're going to be able to hold more fish than if you were to have it all kind of condensed in a column. Again, that's not to say that you can't have a good column tank. I mean, I have one upstairs. It's a big square, you know. But again, you have to appropriate the fish that you're going to put in there. Now, when you go to look at fish, keep in mind of their adult size. More often than not, people get the mistaken idea that a fish will grow to the size of the tank. That's not always true. If you were to get, let's say, a carnival goldfish, right? Get them at like 2 inches. A goldfish is a type of carp, right? It's like a koi. It may start off small, but these things get huge. You know, I mean, you can Google image, you know, big goldfish. You'll see them like huge, right? So when you put a fish that's going to get big in a small tank, let's say if I were to put an arowana in here. It's a tropical type fish. You can get them about this big, but they get to be about 2 feet long, right? Let's say I put one in here. Just because the tank is a little bit smaller, I mean, he'll be fine in there for right now, but just because the tank is a little bit smaller than he's going to be used to as an adult, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to shrink and like maintain his body structure to, you know, to live in that tank. if he's healthy, he's going to keep growing. Now, one thing that people kind of mistakenly think of as a benefit is that when a fish overgrows the size of the tank that he has, he can get stressed out to the point where his growth gets stunted. Now, I've seen this a lot of times. I've even seen it where it's kind of too little too late, if you will. You know, where you have like a big goldfish and he's got, you know, that much extra room to move around in, and he's that big. You know, yeah, he fits and maybe the water quality is kept up, but it's not so much just about water quality. You have to think of life quality. You know, just because we're healthy, that doesn't mean we want to be in a little box all our lives, right? So you really, you know, don't think of it as the fish will go to the size of his tank, because in reality, he's just going to keep growing if he's healthy, and if he gets stunted, then you have, you know, a fish that's stressed out. Granted, you can make him live and, you know, he'll move on, but again, you're diminishing his quality of life, and you don't want to do that for your fish. You want to make them as happy as possible. So, you know, if you're going to have a smaller tank, let's say a 10-gallon, 5-gallon, what have you, get the fish that is going to be the best suited for that tank. The ones that are going to stay small for you, and they're going to enjoy that space all throughout their adult life. You know, don't go out and buy a big cichlid and then put them in a small tank if you don't already have plans in the future to get them into a bigger tank, you know, for when he gets that size. So, so I look like a mess. This is like, whenever I'm not working, or if I'm working on my tanks, you can always tell I don't have gel in my hair. You know, I'm not really made up. But for today, well, for this video series, what I decided to do is I got a 40-gallon glass tank and stand. And I think that's going to be a really good size to start off with. It's not huge, but at the same time, you know, it's what I could afford in my budget. I already got the stand to match for it. Now, in terms of stands, you can go a few different ways. You can build one, which isn't bad, you know, out of a couple pieces of plywood or 2x4s. You know, if you know what you're doing, you can make them look pretty good. You can get the ones in the store that match the size of the tank. You know, they're the right dimensions. They look, you know, they match the tank, and those look great because that way you can put all your stuff underneath, have an open space in the back, run your cables, all your wires, and you don't see any of it. Those can get a little bit more pricey, especially, you know, depending if you get a new one or a used one, but I think sometimes they're worth it. Sometimes I'm a little uneasy, you know, it just depends on the quality of the stand itself. Now, the other things you can get with your tank is a wrought iron stand. And those are going to be kind of like metal legs that come down. They'll support the tank up top, and then usually they'll have a little shelf on the bottom to either put another tank or to kind of keep all your equipment off the ground. Those aren't bad, but I'm not a big fan of them. I think they expose too much. You know, it's like you'll see all the cables, you'll see all the stuff underneath. Again, not bad. It's all personal taste. For me, I don't like them. I like being able to hide everything. Now, the other thing you can do, and this is what you have to kind of be a little bit careful with, is you can get, let's say, use a dresser, right, or a table that you have around the house, or you know, like a countertop, if you will, to put your tank on. Now, before you go out and then put a 200-gallon tank on your nightstand, keep in mind, you know, the weight and the pressure of that tank putting down. Not everything's meant to hold that. I weigh about 155 to 165, depending on, you know, how much I eat in that day. So what I'll do is, let's say a 10-gallon tank, right? I'll figure in how much the whole tank's going to weigh, completely full, completely stocked, gravel and all that, right? And then if I have a table in mind for it, I shouldn't have any apprehension of going up and standing and moving around on top of that table or structure, what have you. Because if I'm too nervous to do that, then I shouldn't feel comfortable putting a tank on top of that, because that's going to be a lot of water pushing down. Also, when you find a place suitable for your stand, make sure it's level. Because if the tank's not level, you're going to be more prone to leaks, you're going to be prone to cracks, and it's not going to be good for the glass or the acrylic, or even the acrylic. You know, you're going to have it all like this, the water level's going to be weird. It's not the best thing. So make sure it's level. If you can avoid a direct contact with the window, it'd be a little bit better, just because you're more prone to algae when it's in front of the window. It's not to say you can't, but you are more prone to algae when it's in front of the window. Trust me, I know. So yeah, you can use a dresser, but also, although a dresser is nice because you can put stuff underneath it and, you know, keep your knickknacks and stuff, dressers and tables aren't usually meant for tanks, right? So all your equipment, your filters and your test kits, your heaters, all that stuff, if they're not in the tank, right? Let's say you have a canister filter. they're going to have to be outside the tank, and then usually you'll have to find like a weird spot to put them. So keep that in mind. You know, you can use a dresser if you find one that's going to hold the weight, that's going to be able to get wet. Oh, before I forget, when you're going to be working with your tank, there's a good chance that stuff around it's going to get wet. So make sure that you have a space that can get a little wet. Usually lay down a towel or something. But make sure you have a space that, you know, you're going to be putting your hand in there, you can be splashing stuff around. So if it's full of, you know, if you got electronics all around it, or if you got your clothes or your valuables around it, you know, you're not going to want to have those around when you're doing your maintenance. You know, so keep that in mind. So when you go to appropriate the right place and you have your tank and all that, you know, it's going to get wet. Trust me, it will. So yeah, glass tanks, they're sturdy, common, cheap. They're not easy to scratch, but they, you know, they do rely on silicone seals, which can be tricky. But usually they're all right. Acrylics are nice, all sorts of unique shapes and sizes. The clarity on new ones is completely awesome. They're welded together, so they're usually a little bit better on the seams, and you can get all sorts of, you know, if I wanted to, I could probably add something up to this and make it like a fluval edge, you know, just because, you know, I know what I would be doing with that. So that's nice, lightweight. The tank size is a little bit more awkward depending on which one you get. And that's not to say they're all like that, but, you know, acrylic has that benefit of having that funky pattern to it. So, yes. This has been part 2 of how to set up a freshwater aquarium. I'm sorry it's been taking so long, folks. I've really had a lot of issues, not just with the equipment, but I crashed my computer trying to do this. I had to just, it was nuts. Believe me, it was nuts. I promise you it's not going to be this bad for the next one. Oh, before I forget, the winner of the subscription contest. I took some time, I looked over all the entries, I actually went to all your channels and you know, kind of got a feel for who you were and, you know, what you're all about. And I picked a winner. The winner is going to be Fish Tank Philip. I enjoyed watching your videos. I think you have some nice tanks, and I think my plants will do really well in there. So be sure to send me an unboxing video. I'd love to see them when you put them in your tank, see how they came out. If you have any certain requests, let me know. We can have to private message me your address so I can send these out to you. I'll get them out to you probably next Monday, depending on how fast you get back to me. So keep an eye on that. For the rest of you, I want to say I'm really happy that you participated. You know, I enjoyed watching and reading your submissions. I'm going to have more contests and stuff like that in the future as this channel grows, and as I get more of you following me, then I'll have more of a base to kind of reach out and do what I can for you. I want to say thank you to aquaticuniverse.com. It's a great forum where I post my ideas and talk to people. Also, for the Rochester area, if you're looking to get into fish, then check out, I believe it's upstateaquatic.org. It's our freshwater club here in Rochester. Me and a couple buddies set it up, and it's really nice. We can, you know, kind of chat, trade, you know, work things out amongst ourselves. It's really nice. We're sponsored by ABC Aquarium in Fairport, and we're also being supported by Pet Friendly on Manitou Road. Great local fish stores. They have a lot of knowledge and experience in the business. Great selection, great prices. Let them know that you checked out the channel. Maybe they'll do something for you, or at least, you know, kind of get you in the loop with all the things that we're doing for this. So keep that in mind. Thank you to Eheim. I got the shirt. I'll be wearing it in my next video, so don't worry about that. And yes, if you haven't already, subscribe, check out the other videos, and I'm going to leave you all with one final note. What I want to know is what got you started in the whole fish keeping business. You know, what interests you about keeping, you know, freshwater, saltwater fish, and, you know, what are your inspirations? What are your aspirations? I'm just going crazy. What are your aspirations for, you know, growing in the aquatic community? What do you want to do with your tanks? You know, so let me know. Comment below. I'd love to read them. And if you have any questions or ideas for other videos, again, hit me up, and I'll be more than happy to incorporate them into my next videos. If you like this one, this is my friend's camera. If it's any good quality, let me know. I'll probably buy it off her. If not, well, then I'll keep searching for a better one. In the meantime, have a great week. Sorry it took so long, and I will talk to you guys in my next videos. Bye.